Recently, I participated in Loom Diary 57 with a friend, and can I just say, I'm a bit annoyed with devlogs, but I don't think this devlog will be that boring, because I didn't go with Unity, nor Unreal, nor the G engine. No. Have you heard of Stride? No, you didn't. The reason for that is, well, it's a bit niche, which means that the documentation is, well, it's there, and when you run into a problem, there won't be a broccoli man there to guide you step by step on how to achieve something. So let me tell you how creating a game in this thing went. We're given a deadline of 3 days and the theme depths, which I didn't really like at first, but after a while I've managed to come up with this entire page of things. One idea that stood out the most was this one, where we tried getting something out of a hole. However, the closer you got, the more that object would cover the screen and prevent you from moving around. And after a discussion with my associate, that's what we settled on. Also, throughout this video, I will be referring to that friend as associate. Screw his pronouns, we have better ones. So to start off, let's make a character controller. So, Stride has recently received a new... I should probably read the script before Now, Stride recently received a brand new physics engine, and after previously using the old one, I chose the new thing. I've actually played with it already while it was in preview, but ever since it got released, a lot of the API changed, so I couldn't really reuse the same scripts. But that's not a big issue. I mean, I wasn't doing anything like complicated, so I made a player, I made him move, and that's it. Nothing of note here. Yet. So, the next thing on my agenda was interaction. You go up to a button, you click it, something happens. Okay, so, how do we detect that? First idea, just have a collision that's not actually colliding with anything, and whenever something enters it, then we know what we are interacting with. In Unity, to make a collision a trigger, meaning that things can pass through it, you just tick a checkbox. In Stride, you have to create a new component, add an eye contact event handler to it, then assign it in the editor, but also don't do it in a subsyn because then you cannot assign it for some reason. And then there's a property that you can override, and when you set it to true or false, I actually don't remember, you disabled collision. But guess what? This little maneuver wouldn't break the engine. No. It would make it piss itself to death. Because, as it turns out, you cannot have a body in a body because... just don't do it. So instead, I just made the interaction zone follow the player every single frame, which is annoying, but works, I suppose, except that it doesn't. It didn't detect anything. Okay, get rid of that. How about we just use raycast? I mean, we can just check the area around the player and get all of the collisions. And that, well, it worked, but the first thing that it would detect would be the player itself, so not really that helpful. However, we can tell it to not return a single object, but multiple objects, which just makes it return nothing. Because why not? So, okay, I know that raycasts are normally explained as shooting a laser, but I was quite literally just having a spherical laser stand in a place. So I just made it shoot from the top to the bottom and it worked. Turns out that there was also this method that would have just done what I wanted to do, but it wasn't in the documentation. I mean, Stride is open source, Beppu is new, bada bing, bada boom. The docs aren't great. So now that we can interact with something, let's make it do something. And the thing I wanted things to do was to rotate the platform. This is also not anything that difficult, you just rotate the thing. However, how do we animate that? Well, I decided to do it through code because, well, first of all, it's more convenient that way, and second of all, we don't really have an animator in Stride. Really, if you know math, you can do a lot of nice things in Stride. And I know that to some math is scary, but also math is fun. And would you look at that, it doesn't work, because turns out Stride uses radians, which I forgot about again. Because who the hell uses radians? Well, turns out mathematicians use radians because... I don't know. But how radians work is that 1 radian is God knows how many degrees. However, pi radians is 180 degrees. I mean, if you are a math head, yeah, this is probably amazing to you. If you're a game development, If you're a game developer, probably a bit confusing, but it's fine. The problem came later when I wanted to use physics, because the physics engine is sort of separate from Stride, so it doesn't actually use the pivot provided by Stride, but instead the center of mass for rotation. Problem? My center of mass was not where I wanted it to be. Now, I could have fixed it using these things called constraints, which basically just limit how an object can move. But there's like 1 trillion of them, and there is absolutely no docks. Okay, hear me out. I've made every single wall have a mass of 0. And then the engine pissed itself. So I added an additional collision that's underground, that you will never be able to collide with, and gave it a mass of 1. And now the center of mass is somewhere there, but it's in the right spot, at least vertically. No, not actually. At least horizontally. In the X and Z directions. In the X and Z plane. In the Y plane. In the vertical plane. I am confused. Whatever, it works. Is it a good solution? Well, it works. And to finish the day off, I decided to implement dialogue. A while ago, I found this library called Ink, which is used for writing, well, dialogue. This is its own language, sort of, that you can do a lot of cool things, such as different options, variables, math, because we love math here. You can do a lot of cool things, and implementing it in Stride wasn't actually that difficult. I've managed to do it during the... I've managed to do it during the jam, and yeah, works. I mean, I'm not using anything like complex. I just with a couple of variables, and I don't even like let you choose different options. I just go through dialogue. And to actually display the things on the screen, I used Mirror, which is okay, this is the worst thing about Stride. UI unusable. Okay, you want to center text on the screen? You can't. You can only do it horizontally. Why? That's a good question. So please trust me, the UI library is absolutely unusable. I have no bloody clue how it works, why it works. Should it be rewritten from the ground up? I think so, but for now we are here. But Stride is open source, so if you don't like something, just replace it. Okay. So I use Mirror. Mirror exists, and I'm glad it exists, but it provides me a lot of pain. Mainly because that UI library cannot do things like rounded corners, gradients, and also it cannot do UI scaling. And no. Providing a different skin for a 4K monitor is not the solution. The solution is to let me just scale the bloody thing. Why is it that Unity, which absolutely sucks, lets me scale UI, and you don't? I mean, that's such a basic thing. Not everybody is using a full HD, whatever the hell. This laptop doesn't even use a full HD. Actually, maybe... No, it's 1440p. This thing is 12p. Am I going insane? And also, if you've played the game and are wondering what the hell did I take to write these dialogues, I don't know. I would just wake up and suddenly there's text in front of me. So I guess this game was created in collaboration with me, my associate, and my shadow demons. Oh, speaking of my associate was responsible for the art. And my associate decided that it would be a brilliant idea to draw everything on paper and then scan it onto the computer. This will be the easy part, said my associate while pulling out the printer. Now, my associate didn't have access to the devil at that point, so for now I just used temporary art. So I decided to start off the next day with... what? With level design. So in a conventional engine, you would probably do this in the editor. However, Stride's editor... how do I describe Stride's editor? Well, it's like this really sturdy brick made out of glass, which means that when you look at it the wrong way, it crashes. And then when you look at the crash handler the wrong way, it also crashes. But if you look at the editor in a really wrong way, it's gonna delete all of your scene data. And this was where the fun began. Yeah, paper. This is probably one of my favorite parts about making games in Stride. When I made my first game jam game in this engine, I've also had to resort to, well, going physical, although looking back I could have used Note, but this is so fun! Like, if you ever think that you're making just some crappy games, but you actually take the time to plan out things physically, then sure, maybe you made some stupid thing on the internet, nobody cares, but this is real. So I created different level elements out of paper, then put them in a drawer, and then I used a picture frame, took out the glass, and then used that glass to write notes over everything. And also, like, sometimes just use it to cover certain parts of the level to sort of visualize how the object will actually abstract everything. When I was satisfied with a level, I would just write it down on a notepad, and then when I finally had a list of all of these, I would very carefully actually create them in the editor. At the end, I had 5 real levels, 2 not real levels, and a couple of crashes, but that was fine. We also had to write the code for the big object. Wasn't anything that special. By interacting with a real crank, you can change the different state of the big object, as it is called, because I ran out of ideas. And when the big object was at its final state, and you interacted with a hole, then it would just load the next level. However, animation. Sure, math is great. However, drags are too. And my main problem with the big object is that when you actually spammed the real crank, it would speed up. I knew that there would be a problem that whenever the object was being animated and then you suddenly decided that it should go somewhere else, then I would either have to stop the animation midway or teleport the object or figure out a different solution, and that solution didn't work because the object would just become faster and faster. This actually took me a whole day to figure out, but my final solution was that I would have a target position which would be animated at a constant rate, and then the actual big object that would move would just like slowly lerp itself towards that. If you don't know what lerp means, then actually no, I don't think that's a real word. Whatever, I would animate it smoothly towards that point and it would work. However, there was a small problem. I couldn't move for some reason. Well, it turns out in Stride, changing the world position of an object is difficult. You need to do a lot of matrix math for some reason, because none of the built-in methods work. So the physics engine doesn't actually change the world position and instead changes the local position, except that the physics engine treats them as the world position. So the problem was that when you drag a prefab to a scene, it gets placed in a different object. Then I would move that object, and even though it would like appear it somewhere else, it would still be at the center of the scene. Luckily, when I realized that, I managed to fix that quite easily, but why? Even though I was still working with placeholder art, I could implement one art, which would be the big object art. Art. For the sake of sanity, my associate decided to just draw it on an iPad. So in the end, we got a fish, sort of a hammer with a nail for some reason, an obscure reference to something, and a fucking lobster. But then finally the time came and it's printer time! It wasn't that bad. Turns out my laptop is running Linux, and turns out that printers just sort of work on Linux, so it just sort of worked. Arch, by the way. No, I can do better. I use Arch, by the way. Actually, I don't think I have that much to say about this day, because most of it just involved making things, well, work. But I can talk about one thing, and that's all the different things that actually went into having this thing work. Well, before the jam even began, a week prior, I've created the project and started importing random things. Because I had to write code to make Stride use the UI library, I had to write my own scene manager, and I also had to write code to make QASIC, which is my own little fun library for using a cheat console and doing settings for you. And this time, I've actually decided to I decided to make proper UI for the console, because previously I had to keep using an external tool to connect to the game to actually run things, which was really annoying. And I've made it so that the console appears automatically whenever the game detects that it's in debug mode. And then, when I wanted to load a level, I would just use LL or load level, followed by the name of the level, to load the level. I know, could you even guess? I also wrote a little system during the jam to define who has priority over what. So for example, for input, when you have the pause menu opened, it takes priority and you cannot move the player. But if it's closed, then the player receives priority. It's all defined in a single file that you can technically modify if you want to. Anyway, day 3, which was the art implementation day. So I started out by cutting out different elements from the scans, resizing them and then putting them in the engine. And the player was actually not a sphere, but instead this funny looking cat. But the thing about this cat was that it didn't have animations. You know where this is going. So, math. Have you heard of the sine wave? So I decided to animate this little cat to just sort of jump from one leg to another. Nothing that special, just use a sine wave. There you go. I've made the animation play whenever the player changed position, but when you would stop, I would let the cat move until it landed on one of its feet. My associate decided that drawing the 5th big object would actually be too much effort, so my associate went into a literal trash can and found some random medical book and then scanned pages out of it, which... Sure. At the end I used this picture of a brain because I had 3 hours left and I had to have a picture of something. Actually, there was also the 7th object. No, crap. There was also a 6th object. I decided not to use the scans because that would be uncreative, but I had one unused NPC, so I just used it as the big object in the very first, or I guess the half level as it is called. The introduction level. Turns out that NPC wasn't supposed to be unused. No, there was a piece of dialogue for him, which was honestly one of my favorite pieces of dialogue. Now it's too late, and I guess no one will ever know unless you run this debug command, because of course you can. We also came up with an idea of actually grabbing the object from the hole and having an animation of like hands actually grabbing it. I took my camera, not this one, I am using a crappy camera today. I grabbed this camera and pointed it down. I recorded a video of me grabbing something from the air and then just put it into DaVinci, cut out every single frame and made this little animation. This is the result. It almost wasn't added to the game because I didn't have time, but I decided that this is actually worth it and it wasn't that much effort. Actually, there was a lot of polish done during the very last hours of the jam. One of the things I've added was, well, text on the screen about what the object is, because previously all of these objects seemed just like random garbage, and, well, it was random garbage. However, with text I've made it look like it's not, which is great. And once again, I don't know how I wrote this. I just wake up, I see text files. Great. Okay, I know that this game is probably not worth more than whatever you have on your Steam backlog, but if you haven't played it yet, I highly encourage you to do it. Encouragement over. For the very last scene when you actually talk to yourself, or the version of yourself, because you are actually a different personality in your own brain, and this is all a dream. When you are talking to yourself, there is this. How did I do it? Well, at that point my associate was... I have no idea, so guess I'll do it myself. If you couldn't tell by the drawings in this video, if I actually decide to make them, a bit of a different art style. So, what I did was I took the player, I traced over it, then I traced over that trace, and there. But then, a different position. How did I do it? I just sort of... okay, it's there. Then I traced over whatever that thing was and there you go. But to actually change those sprites, well, I didn't do that because that sounded like effort. Instead, I just copied the NPC and just made it follow the player and the original NPC with an offset of 100 meters. Then in the dialogue code, I suppose, I would have a variable that I would use to switch between different cameras. If you enable the debug camera, you can actually see this. And for the next pose, well, I did the same thing, except that now it was 200 meters. And in the very final hour, I wanted to do sound effects, but I was faced with an executive decision. Should I A, add sound effects, which I've already recorded, just how to edit them and implement them, and I even had some ambient, or B, make the game run in a slightly bigger window than whatever the hell this is. So in the end there are no sound effects, but you can press F11 to enter full screen mode, which is nice. And that was the game. That's how we made it. But I feel I need to answer a question, like, why am I using Stride? In my previous video about it, I said that it's not good. Like, it has a lot of issues, it's really unstable, UI is unusable, like, it's not viable for most people. But, you see, with Stride I sort of realized that I've been sold a lie a bit. Because modern game development is not the same game development that I watched when I was growing up. Like, I've seen so many videos about, like, the Konami code or, like, the what was it? The debug kits that developers would use. They would have additional buttons for, like, shortcuts, and you could actually use them in already released games and they would still work. That was so fun to me. Seeing how people had to create these different, like, solutions, just, like, make it work. But now, we no longer have those problems. Most engines just have everything you need, which is great. You can do what you want and you are not being stopped, but that's the thing I really liked about. What's more interesting? To hear how someone changed their, like, entire mechanics of a game and done, like, different little hacks to make something seem like water, or that someone downloaded a shader from the asset store. When I made games in Unity, I honestly preferred working on tools, because it's not my thing. But with Stride, getting things to run and having unconventional solutions to unconventional problems, that's what I like. And if you're weird like me, then Stride might be for you. Sure, sometimes it doesn't run, sometimes it barely works, you need to be very careful sometimes, but it's just so fun. People tell me to try other engines, and I did. I tried Godot, and I wanted to make a video about it, but I couldn't, because it was just so easy to use. While I was pretty much almost finished with the game, I just said no, because I was bored, because there was no challenge, there was nothing to solve, there was nothing to be proud of, it was just a game, perfect in every way. It's not what I wanted to make. I think this is the problem with modern devlogs. Like, we solved all the problems. Now the only thing you can do is go full Danny style and sure, yeah, I've made this enormous game in a week and released it on Steam. And now it has 100,000 players online, and that's unsustainable. And I'm not saying there aren't problems you need to solve in normal engines. Yes, they are. The engine you are using doesn't really matter. Because what matters is that if you can actually do the things you want to do, if you can create something beautiful and possibly impact somebody. And I can only do that with Stride. I have Linux, I need a skirt! I need to buy a skirt!